So first of all, I'd like to introduce the panel. We've got lots of really good experience today. So first of all, well, we've got Justin Day, Naomi Bolton and Alan Fairley. I'm going to start with Justin. Justin's feeling a little bit under the weather, Justin. I hope you're going to manage to sort of stay with us. But if you'd like to just give the audience a little bit of background about you and what you do and why you're here, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
So probably feeling a little bit under the weather because actually the weather's great, which for someone like me is not so good. So, it's horrible but good problem. So my name's Justin Day. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cloud Gateway. I have worked in networks and security for pretty much my entire working life. So knocking on the door sort of 25 years now. And I have a fairly mixed experience in private and public sector. First half of my life in private sector, most recently in the public sector, starting with central government, and in the last 3 or 4 years working more exclusively in both health and policing. So no police expert. I never professed to be a police expert. I think it's always best to listen to the experts in policing about that, but certainly the technologies around that to help overcome certain situations. I've got a wealth of experience, so that's
brilliant. Thanks, Justin. Well, talking about expertise in policing, I'll go on to Naomi, because Naomi fairly recently joined us here at Cloud Gateway. We're delighted that she has, feel quite honoured, but you've got quite an interesting background, Naomi. Do you want to give the audience a bit of an overview?
Yep, morning. So my background's opposite to Justin, as it's not technical, but it is a background in policing. So a 15-year career in policing, mostly in Nottinghamshire Police. Went through the ranks from PC up to Chief Inspector, variety of roles, response to neighbourhoods, but was also business change lead on the introduction of Niche. So had that pleasure in force. And then my last role was on secondment to, it was a Home Office and an MPCC role as staff officer to Chief Constable Andy Marsh on international policing. And then, so an interesting policing background, then been with Cloud Gateway for just coming up to 2 months.
Oh goodness, 2 months already. So I bet you've probably got some really interesting stories. But I think before we move on to Alan, it would be remiss of me not to mention that there's that ongoing incident with Nottinghamshire Police, and I'm sure that you've probably got some colleagues involved in that. So our thoughts are with you. We don't know anymore, but it's been on the national news. So fingers crossed that that all resolves itself. But Alan, last but not least, save the best to last.
Last and least, yeah. Good morning, folks. Alan Fairley. So until quite recently, it was about just over a year ago now, I retired after spending 30 years in consulting with Accenture. And I guess for the last 8 or 9 of those years, I ran what we used to call the public safety business in the UK. So that was all the part of Accenture in the UK that looked after police and justice, the other areas of Home Office, including borders and immigration and passports and the like, and also the National Crime Agency. And in addition to that, for the last 4 years of that, I served as the chair of the Tech UK Justice and Emergency Service Committee. So that was two-year tenures. And since then, since retiring, I've started doing just a little bits and pieces of advisory work, and just recently qualified as a non-exec director. So I'll be looking to move into that area soon as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alan. Thanks for joining us. And we're really pleased that you're able to give us some insight today. So breaking down boundaries in policing, I was thinking, like, where do we start with this? And fairly recently, there's been a lot of stuff on LinkedIn about Andy Cook's report, The State of Policing. Now, strictly speaking, that probably wouldn't be something that we would tackle here at Cloud Gateway. We're very much a tech and infrastructure services company. But I had a little look at it and I just thought, let's throw it out there. Wondering if the panel have read it, what you thought. Who am I going to put on the spot? Maybe put you on the spot first, Alan. Have you read it? Have you heard? What do you think?
I have actually, not in depth, but I have read it, and I think it's a good report, right? It's the first report since Andy Cook took over from Sir Tom Windsor last year, and as you would expect, it is a good report. It does clearly lay out some of the challenges, the key challenges facing policing in the UK and England and Wales rather. I think it talks about forces needing to balance the priorities. It talks about having to have a clear definition of the role of policing, and that's a key question that I'll come back to. And it also talks about the fact that police forces need to be more efficient in what they do. All clear things, all good things, and all accurate things. And whilst I think it's a good report, I think it's good at setting out the key challenges. I think it does less of trying to set out some solutions or offering recommendations. Now, to be fair to the authors, it was never intended to do that. But it got me thinking that this is another report that we've seen, certainly in the last 10 years or so that I've been in around policing. It's another report, or we've all seen conferences or summits where somebody stands, I've even done it myself, somebody stands up and talks about the key challenges in policing, and waxes lyrical about the challenges, but offers less in the way of solutions, concrete solutions. And I think, to me, I think the narrative really has to change. I think the current model of policing in England and Wales is in a really critical state. I think it's delivering substandard quality of service to the public, and it's putting huge amounts of strain on the officers and the staff that serve. And I think if you were designing a police model for England and Wales from scratch with a blank piece of paper, say, I think you find it hard to come up with someone that's going to come up with a model that we've currently got, with 40 forces doing quite often the same thing a number of different ways. It's inefficient, and it just puts up huge barriers for things like collaboration and interoperability. And one of the most important things for modern day digitally enabled policing, it prevents really good, efficient sharing of data. And Naomi, as a kind of serving officer or ex-serving officer, it'd be good to get your view on that. So I think it's, and I know that this question has been asked many, many times in the past, and it always seems to be the elephant in the room. But I do think there needs to be a more centralist approach, or even a national approach to answering the question of, is 43 forces the right number? Clearly it's not. But what is the right number? What is the new model? And I think we need to have a centralist approach, rather than getting away from the individual forces being able to do their own thing and being their own little fiefdoms. And I'm exaggerating for effect, but that is not helping the model at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I think, to be fair, I read somewhere, it might have been in Andy Cook's report, that actually it's something like 50 years next year since the 43 policing model was introduced, and where it was regionalised policing, and most of the crimes were like local, and there certainly weren't any tech crimes. So at the time it was fit for purpose. It's like 50 years down the line, you know, it just doesn't fit anymore, doesn't it, really? What are your thoughts, Naomi?
It's an interesting dynamic, because yes, we've got a localized approach with, you know, 43 forces doing things differently, but then that's also intertwined with the fact that we've got 43 police and crime commissioners with a very different view of how they want things to be run in their forces. And we've got the funding formula, which is not fit for purpose, where forces are affected differently as to whether they get the precept increase in their council tax or not. So kind of each force has its own pressures, its own context, which they're trying to tackle. But absolutely there are massive inefficiencies, because there are, you know, 43 different ways of doing things. And I think the report also highlights, you know, and I've worked with the MPCC, so I've seen it, that there's lots of will to do things on a national scale, but there's actually no power behind that, and there's no way to enforce that. And I think it makes a line of, all it takes is, well, even if you get all 43 chiefs agreeing on how to do something, all it takes is one PCC to say, I'm not doing that in my force, and then you've got a difficult, you know, scenario. So I think there's the complexity of policing is the model, it's the structure, it's how things are set up, it's how things are legislated, how things are paid for, and, you know, and the local political influence and the national political influence. So I don't envy chief officers and the pressures that they're under. And, you know, and the report highlights, you know, it's that increasing complexity, increasing demand. They haven't got the increased forces to go with it. So again, it comes back to Alan's earlier point of, well, then it's the so what. So we know it's really difficult, we know it's really complex, we know it's not fit for purpose, but how do we help? And I suppose that's my area of interest, having come out of policing, is, well, what can we do from a tech perspective or, you know, private sector perspective to help with some of that complexity? Obviously we're not going to have lots of the answers, but we might be able to help with one little area.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I certainly, for me, what I found really interesting about that state of policing report, and again, not having had a police background, was the synergies with tech in policing. So all the usual, like, things have got to change. We'd say that about technology, tick. Progress is slow in policing to change, tick. It's slow in tech as well. Resources is an issue in policing, because hey, you join the police, correct me if I'm wrong, because you want to make a difference and fight crime. You don't necessarily join because you're interested in technology. Some people might sort of take a bit of a steer, but I'd sort of put my neck on the line and say, I'd say that the majority of police officers have not joined to do the tech bit. They've joined to do the operational policing, wherever that takes them. So that's what I thought was really, really interesting. It's also around the curve, and we're finding, particularly in the area that Cloud Gateway works, which is infrastructure and networking, that resource is a massive issue. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I know Justin's got some quite strong views on that. So that's why I thought it was quite a nice sort of lead into this. So that leads me really to my next question, is that if we think that we're trying to break down the boundaries in policing, the $1 million question is, how do we do that? What are the main boundaries, do we think? Go on, Alan, we'll go back to you.
Okay, yeah. So I think we've laid out a pretty bleak picture so far. The one thing I would say is that it's not that everybody is just kind of navel gazing or staring at the problem with no solutions. I think we are actually starting to see some pockets of progress. If you look at what PDS have done over the last 3, 4, maybe 5 years, we're starting to see people who have realised that 43 forces doing the same thing different ways is not efficient and it's not effective. And so there does need to be a single cohesive approach to solving some of these problems from a technology point of view. So if we kind of focus away from the more cultural or the more policy end of things, more into the technology end of things, I think, as I say, we are starting to see some progress being made. It's hard. You look at what progress Ian Bell and the folks at PDS have made over 3-4 years. They've introduced the National Monitoring Centre, they've rolled out the National Aiming Programme and Office 365, but it's been hard, partly due to cultural problems, partly it's just hard to get funding or to get everybody on the same page. But I think it's worth looking at that, and it's worth looking at the progress that's been made and trying to build on that, trying to build on the momentum that they've already started out building. Because it is progress and it is goodness and it is the right kind of thing. What they've done is they've created a strategy, the police digital strategy that reflected the 2030 policing vision that was created by the NPCC. And I think what they did, that strategy was the right thing to do, because it laid out a framework for what they were trying to achieve from a digitally enabled police force nationally, right? Yeah. It was done at a national level, and I think that's exactly the right thing to do. But the key thing for me, and that strategy is now being refreshed now. It's 3 years old now, which seems it's gone crazily fast. It's being refreshed now, and people who are interested can have a say. So they're asking, members of the public even to say, look, this is the strategy we've got. We're trying to refresh it so that it's relevant. Here's a draft version, have your say. So you can get in touch with PDS and ask for a draft version. But I think for me, some of the boundaries that we need to tackle are things like access to cloud services. If that strategy, in common with any other strategy from any other organization in any other industry, has to be underpinned by getting access to cloud services, so that you can get access to things like some of the new sexy technology like analytics and like automation and, dare I say, artificial intelligence. I know that's quite controversial within a policing context, but but even to some of the more rudimentary ends of technology, things like ERP systems or staff systems, they are all provided through the cloud now. Very, very few industries, very few organizations will have them on-prem, if you like. So I think one of the things that we need to get right straight off the bat is to facilitate that, quick, easy access, flexible access, cost-efficient access up to these services and these tools on the cloud. And I think that really is one of the key things. If we do that, which we can do, we all know they can do it. The technology is available. And like all of these things, the technology is the easy bit. It's the people and the culture on the that side. There's the hard bit. But I think, as I said, PDS have created some momentum there on a national basis. And I think we need to build upon that.
Yeah, I agree. What's your thoughts, Naomi?
I think, again, it's the right move forward in terms of a national approach and strategy. But again, we've also seen, 43 different adoptions and take up of that. And I think I was just reflecting on, you know, sort of my career and what happened since, you know, I joined in 2006 and then austerity kicked in, and all of a sudden, you know, police forces were having to get rid of neighbourhood policing teams, which is, you know, highlighted in the state police report, but also it affected back office teams and IT teams. And I think we're facing the same kind of issue again now, where resourcing is a worry with, you know, uplift and the focus on officer numbers. What's that going to mean for, you know, back office teams and particular IT teams? And, you know, I know there's a struggle in policing to recruit talented people in tech because, you know, it's public sector, it doesn't pay so great. So, you know, I think another challenge is you've got that ambition, that drive, you know, the strategy, but do we have the people in forces that will be able to help with that adoption, with that resilience, you know, those skills to drive that forward? Because I think there is a lot of, you know, ambition there. I think there's a lot of appetite for change. I think there's a lot of recognition of what needs to be done, but it's then, well, how do you do that in a force where your, you know, resources are constrained or you don't have the right skill mix? So I think it's another, you know, pressure that's felt differently across different forces, because, you know, the forces took a different approach to, you know, how they dealt with austerity, and that, you know, so the impacts aren't equal across IT teams. And I think that's what we've seen with the national rollout, the national enabling programme. Some forces have absolutely flown with it, and other forces are still at the very beginning of their journey. So again, it's that mixed picture across policing that I think forces are currently dealing with.
I think really what both you and Alan are saying, if I summarise, is that tech is really just the enabler. And if you carefully plan and execute it, transformation will happen. Justin, I know that you and I have had lots of conversations about this. I personally think that interoperability is the way to go, but it's incredibly difficult, and I don't think anyone would disagree. What are your thoughts on why it's not happening consistently or not happening at all, and how, as a conscientious supplier, can we help policing with that?
Yeah, there's so many things in there. I think that the technology as an enabler is obviously one of my absolute favorites. I think one of the things, just sort of using that to come into this, is that I think what's potentially an interesting shift, and this is something that I've experienced in my entire career, and it's not unique to public sector, it's not unique to policing, it's not unique to anything, is when there's a focus on a business type, and looking at what their core objective is. So, you know, I started my life working in with insurance companies, and we went through the same conversation where they were looking at tech. And I remember having conversations with a business level, which was, we need to focus on being an insurance company. So it sort of then brings you back to, well, technology is the enabler. And that was a different time, 20, 25 years ago. What we've got now is it's really pleasing to see reports that are focused not on technology, because it doesn't make technology go away. It means that we can start to have the same conversation, but with, you know, a different viewpoint. So rather than, you know, being caught up in the last few years, there's been humongous market hype, which has been, in my opinion, damaged the good that can be done by cloud services and AI and Internet of Things and network infrastructure and all of those good things, because the focus has been on it rather than, this is what we need to achieve. Oh, actually, there's some really great things that can go and do that. And I think again, this is not unique to policing. I think this is actually a really important point, because keep stressing it's not unique to policing, which means that there's actually a broad church of experience that people should have across public sector that you can learn from mistakes, learn from the good, learn from, you know, the positive and negative, and take forward. What has happened or is happening, though, and I think again it comes to, and this is the bit that I, you know less about regional policing and how it works from a policing perspective, but when you've essentially got you know, and forgive me for any of the naivety here, 43 different companies with 43 different drives, you're very naturally going to have differences across all 43, and therefore trying to build interoperability where the outcome you're looking for is a policing interoperability is very, very difficult when the foundation of which you're building on is not interoperable by nature. And I think, you know, people sometimes get lured into thinking that, well, we're all kind of on the internet, or we're all on this common infrastructure, or we all use Microsoft 365 or whatever, and that it just kind of magically all sticks and fits together. But that's not the case. And when you've got such a big entity, subtle changes, even big changes, doesn't matter. Where they're made in different areas have huge knock-on impacts because of consideration around. So it's not an easy thing to resolve by any means. And it's not that there should be a diktat that says this is how you should do things. That's not going to work. It's just not going to work. But a framework of core approach, core service that everyone buys into, whilst recognizing that I think you're always going to have differences regionally. You know, I'm a proud Norfolk boy. I would imagine that policing in Norfolk is rather different to policing in London and Manchester. And so there are going to be different ways in which you do things, but there are commonalities. And as long as you stick with those, I think you can find that blend in between, say both at a technical level and what I assume will be at the policing level as well.
So that's really interesting. I want to pick up on something you said about digital foundation. What do you mean by that?
So for me, I think, again, when we come to technology, despite the fact it sounds like I've kind of talked about, we've been wowed by all these technologies, we have, and they've done a great marketing job, which is what they're there to do. And actually they solve a lot of great ills. But they've been the lead rather than what an outcome or a business requirement is. So I think there's loads of really, really good things there. However, the problem with technologies, or multiple technologies, is that if we look at IT as a sphere, as a great big circle, depending on which dimension you wish to look at it in, there's lots of different parts of IT. So go from cloud to applications and services, all the way down to print, end user compute, whatever it might be. But all of these things have to operate on a foundation, and a traditional foundation is a network. And we've been lured into thinking that the internet is just a cheap and easy version of that just magics everything away. Now, for clarity, actually, in many cases, it's absolutely the right thing to use. But is it uniquely the right thing to use? Probably not. There's lots of blends of different networks from different providers that you can bring all this stuff together. But in a digital world, a world that, we look at the change of technology and enablement is bordering on exponential. You can have change almost daily. The next new thing resolves something, and you want to be able to use it. You cannot build on a rickety foundation. And by that, I mean something that traditionally takes months in which to change or move, costs way too much, doesn't offer kind of flexibility. The last kind of piece of the new digital era, moving into this new world, is the networking, the infrastructure, the connectivity, the security that goes with that. So for me, a digital foundation is a change to that. It leverages the same technologies under the bonnet. Of course it does. That much hasn't changed, but it can move and shift to allow you to consume those services. So, for example, just an easy example, if someone is using Microsoft Azure and they're consuming AWS as well, and they say, right, actually, there's a fantastic service that we've just become aware of in Google Cloud. It should be your expectation that you can just press a button and it's available, and it's available to everything. It's available everywhere. That is what expectation should be. And that should drive the behaviors of companies that provide networking, provide infrastructure, provide services. You cannot, it's not acceptable to sit on that kind of traditional networking and traditional approach. And thus, consequently, a digital foundation is the opposite of what has been, and is, in my opinion, the brave new world.
Okay, thanks, Justin. That's really interesting. I'm going to go back now to Alan to say, I know you've been out of it, you're talking about been retired for about 12 months or so now, but I imagine that probably not much has really changed in that 12 months. Can you concur with what Justin said, or have you got any other views on that?
No, I completely agree with that. I think it's absolutely essential. As I said, I'll go back to the digital strategy that's been issued by PDS. I think that is the right way to go. If you look at any other industry, they're all actually quite a bit ahead, further down the road of using a digital foundation, as Justin's just described, in order to get access to cloud services that can enable them to be a more effective and a more efficient organization. Policing are quite some way behind that. They're only at the start of the journey. And I absolutely concur. And I think the digital strategy is the right way to go, but underpinning that digital strategy has to be the ability to get access to cloud services, to get access to not just a single like Azure or like AWS or Google, whatever it is, but to get access to any cloud service provider, any function on any cloud that you want to, as Justin says, at the press of the button. Because if you don't have that, then you're just perpetuating the barriers. And really, you have to have it in a, as Justin said, a flexible way, contractually, so that you only pay for what you use when you use it. You have to have it in a way that's effective so you can get access to any cloud, and it's got to be flexible and it's got to be secure, especially with the kind of data that we're talking about for policing, which is no, secure data and transfer and sharing of secure data is not unique to policing. You have that in health, you have it in banking, you have it in insurance. There's the whole raft. None of the challenges that we're looking at here have not been solved before. And this is, I think, one of the key things is that we have to do as a policing family is you need to look at and learn and be able to adopt the lessons from elsewhere. Steal with pride, which is unfortunate for policing, but if you know what I mean, take the ideas, take the challenges that have been resolved elsewhere and apply them to policing. I think one of the key things Naomi mentioned earlier was there is the willingness to change. I think that is the case for most of policing, but there are still pockets, in some cases quite large pockets, of old culture of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. There's some forces out there running technology that's decades old, it's out of its service regime and all that sort of stuff. I think you have to kind of move forward from that. There has to be more of a desire and an energy and a drive to say, no, we have to change, because otherwise we're not going to be an effective police force in an ever increasingly digitally enabled world that we've got today.
So I completely 100% agree with both of you, but I suppose playing a bit of devil's advocate, and maybe this is something that Naomi might say with her background, is what would you say to an officer or a police force who says, but we just don't have the money, we spend all our time and resource in trying to keep the lights on, we can't focus on that journey to cloud, it's really expensive. And how do we help police forces break that cycle? Not quite sure who to put that question to. Who wants to have a go with that one? Naomi?
I'll do my best and then someone else can jump in and save me. It's difficult because, again, there's a mixed picture in terms of where forces are at, and some are literally just trying to keep the lights on. And I think from an operational, perspective, I didn't work in an IT team, but from an operational perspective, I think there's that frustration from frontline officers and staff that they've got this tech at home that does things very quickly and easily, and they have tech at work that is just so frustrating and isn't fit for purpose. And it's a problem that's only going to get exacerbated. I was reading about, the Internet of Things, and then it just dawned on me, well, what does that mean from an investigative perspective? I remember having a briefing where a murder was detected because of the sensor in the car passenger seat that showed the offender had taken the person to the woods and not back from the woods. And that's just one example. But if you've got fridges telling you when they were opened, or all these, I'm not techie, I don't, but again, it's that, well, how are police forces going to deal with that overwhelming demand? How are the IT teams going to help them deal with that demand and that complexity? And so I think there's always been a frustration of the here and now of operational policing, of we've got this problem and now we need to fix it. But then also the capacity to think about, well, what are we going to need in the future? How are we going to deliver that? How are we going to manage our networks? And I think sometimes that forward thinking isn't there because they haven't got the capacity to do it. But then that means that we have got that outdated tech, or we have got those networks that can't cope with the level of demand that the forces are going to have to be dealing with. And it's that difficulty of, if they haven't got enough capacity for now, what is that going to mean in 5 years' time, when we just know that demand's going to continue going through the roof? So I don't know if that answers your question at all. But
yeah, it does. It's an interesting debate, isn't it? Because I wonder, and I don't know what you guys think, is that, so are we saying that we should leave the policing to the police and we should leave the technology to the technologists? And is that Is that what we should do? And with that effect, going back to our earlier chat where we talked about skills gaps and resources, would that sort that? You're nodding, Naomi. What do you think?
I think it's about, if we can take away some of that day-to-day pain to enable the police teams to focus on the future, then that will help with that complexity. We have, tech companies have got that capacity to get the foundations right. So if we can take that pain away from policing, I think then it will just free up that thinking of, well, what do we need? What's that forward planning? What services are going to be out of date in a year or two? What are we going to need to do with our network? All those kind of questions. I think if we can free them up to be more forward thinking, it's going to help with that day-to-day policing.
Okay. I'll jump in, Moira. I think
you may.
This is one of my favorites. This is so. Yeah, I make no apology for the fact that I come from an outsourced type background. There's no point hiding behind that. I spent time in telcos. That's very much how they operate. And so, maybe my view of things has, I would like to think, has changed as I've gone through my career. It was nice to, like I said, it was private sector to start with, to understand, having conversations with companies, typically insurance companies at that time, who were saying, actually, we just want to focus on insurance because that's where we're really good, and then move IT out. There's these things tend to go in cycles. The whole insourcing, outsourcing, onshoring, offshoring, it is a phenomenon that goes around in circles. And I think that the balance for me is that, do I believe that everything should be moved out? I don't. But I've never truly understood why you wouldn't focus your time, your effort, your money, your resources on what you're there to do and where your core skills are. And I think that's probably why I labour the point about not understanding policing, is that's not my core skill set. Things have changed slightly, that there's actually, if you'd have asked me this question 10 years ago, I'd have said probably kick everything out. Whereas now I'd say that there are things that should remain under your own jurisdiction. I think there are certain areas of bespoke application. I think security, definitely things around how you monitor and understand your own services, what we sort of refer to as the keys to the kingdom. So for those that understand running a SOC, cyber SOC, and drawing all of that information into a SIEM, so all of the security events you get, I honestly believe that that's a great place to keep that kind of stuff. I think you should have that in-house. I think you should have people that understand exactly how things are knitted together. So you don't necessarily need to be the people that are coding. You need to be more architectural. I think that's a thing as well. But I think it's a limited function that is required for the bits that are the bridge between the business and IT in many ways. And then those services, I think if you have those out with specialists, and again, I'm not saying full outsourcing, I'm just saying with specific things, if you then build those partnerships with those companies as well, you can start to understand, when can we have these things, how can we have these things, and you should have a two-way conversation, which then becomes, we have a problem, and the undertone of that conversation isn't, I need a firewall, for example. It's, I have security concerns that are regulation driven or legislation driven or whatever. Brilliant. Or you have something coming the other direction that says, right, we have this technology that can achieve this, it moves this or does this. Does this feel like a fit? Rather than the conversation being, hey, I know how you can solve policing of people being taken to the woods or whatever that is. That's not a technology company's business. That's not what they should be doing. So that is how I think that model extrapolates really well. But it's really, really important that there's those key middle people that remain.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because it's not about the carving out or shrinking of teams. It's about having the right focus for the right IT people to then allow you to take the people who are on the fringes and push them absolutely into the police force.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because quite often when we have these conversations, people say, oh, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas, we'll never do that. But I like what you say about, actually, let's take away the skills that are, the things that are really not that interesting, and leave them with a really interesting and important stuff for making sure that they are supporting and they've got all the right resources for the policing, which is the primary purpose of the police forces, and all that other stuff, which is, it's just a bit of a mess and it's not that interesting, and it's very time consuming, and not necessarily the day-to-day, but also keeping up with the qualifications on that. Get rid of that, give that to somebody that does that as a specialism, and then you get a really good balance. And I'm quite conscious of the time, but this is a little bit off the brief because we didn't talk about this before the webinar, but I was reading something really interesting last night. The College of Policing, they've just recently published something called Key Trends and Implications out to 2040, which first of all made me feel really quite old, because I thought, oh God, hopefully I'll be retired by then. You might not be, Justin, because you shared with us that you're only just 40, you baby. But what was interesting there is one thing which I picked out, where they talked about technological change and convergence, and they say that connectivity, processing power and volume is only going to continue to exponentially grow to 2040. So this problem is not going away. As suppliers, let's not sort of shy away from the fact that obviously Cloud Gateway is a commercial company and we're here to make money, but we also feel that we do that ethically by supporting our customers and trying to understand them, which is why we have people like Naomi and Alan on board to help us really get a good idea of what the challenges are. And I also think it's really important, we talked about it early on, to not necessarily focus too much on the tech, but actually on the outcomes. What are we going to fix? I think you mentioned that, Alan. I think that's a really, really, really good point. So I'm gonna have to sort of try and wrap up now, because I think that we are going to run out of time. But I just want to ask the panel really, what you sort of give me what your takeaways are from this really. For me, it was getting three very different perspectives. So Naomi, very much operational policing. Alan, yours is more broad and balanced, unsurprisingly, and Justin, yours is more from a tech point of view. And I think they're all very valid and very interesting, and it's good to understand how they sort of interwork with each other. But let's go to you, Naomi. What have you taken away from today?
Oh, big question there. I think it's been really useful just in prepping for this and reading, the state of policing, and reading the College of Policing, and there's lots in there that didn't surprise me, wasn't new, but I think the scale of the challenge going forward is kind of what really struck me on that, but also what can we do, comes back to Alan's point about, well, what do we do, so we know what the issue is, we know, the state of policing, what can we do with tech to help with those issues? So it's breaking down those boundaries to help with those and improve the outcomes is what's struck me today. Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. Alan?
Yeah, I would, along the same sort of lines, I think, just to restate what I said earlier, I think the current policing model is in a really, really bad way at the moment and does need change. We need to start talking about and implementing solutions, not just staring at the problems and restating what the problems are. And I think technology has a lot to offer in terms of facilitating some of the improvement that needs to be made. I think it needs to be done at a national level. We are seeing some progress. We've got the new strategy coming out. I think one of the key things, and to answer your previous question of should policing be led to police officers and technology to the technologists, absolutely not. Designing technology in isolation from the business or from police officers will very rarely result in useful outcomes. I think what you have to do is sit down with the police officers, because they're the ones at the front line. They know the problems that they're faced, and therefore they can feed that into, this is a problem statement, therefore technologists solve that problem statement with technology. So I think the two sides have to come together and collaborate. And I think at the end, it's all about, for me, it's all about how do we unblock getting to cloud services efficiently, in a cost-effective way, in a secure way. And that's, as Justin mentioned earlier, the digital foundation.
Okay, thanks, Alan. And final words for you, Justin. I know you'll always like to have the last word.
My wife says that. Yeah, I think for me is that I love the fact that I'm hearing and seeing more that is around the policing issues, rather than a desire to talk to the technology that is required that can resolve these issues. I think that's a better conversation. I think it is a nationally driven conversation. But I think the thing that's really important is nobody should be naive into walking into the fact that this is going to be a big change. is that, you know, regional police forces will want to look after regional police forces, and it doesn't need to be this way or that way. There's a way in which, keep using the word foundation, you can create a foundation that is more sort of almost philosophical here. It's a sort of strategic, that people can then choose what they move into. So you then have kind of chosen interoperability rather than forced interoperability. And I think that is the way that I think you can bring all of those forces potentially together, that builds confidence. And again, I'm now sort of straying outside of my area of expertise here, but is in my opinion, you're almost maintaining all of the, you know, the goodness and concerns that you may have. You're not having that taken away, but being given all of these other things as well. I think that is a, you know, more of a central drive, but without being forced to it. And yeah, I think whilst I'm hearing more about non-technical requirements that can then be facilitated down, I think that's great. And it's incumbent on companies like Cloud Gateway to ensure that we do exactly the same in the other direction. So you should never hear me telling you about how to police, because that's not for me to talk about.
Very wise words there, I think, very wise words. Right, so we are just about out of time, Mo. That just leaves me enough time to say, look, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. If you've got any questions or you want to hear any more about what Cloud Gateway does, then please do get in touch. I know that there's going to be a copy of this probably going on LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to watch it back or recommend to anyone else, but and please do follow us on LinkedIn. And thank you very much for joining us. It's been
there is just one last question in the Q&A, just very quickly. It's probably for Alan. It's, when is the refreshed PDS strategy expected to come out? Do we know?
It's currently out for consultation at the moment, so you can get in touch with PDS and ask for a draft copy, and you can put comments back into them. I'm sure it'll be on their website. I've seen it on, it was I think it was LinkedIn I saw it on, and I replied to that, so I've got a copy of it. But I would suggest either going on the website or some of their posts on LinkedIn, get a copy, have a look at it, and put your comments back in. I would imagine that they'll give a couple of months to get comments back in, and then probably towards the end of this year they'll look at publishing the refresh one, without wanting to put words in PDS's mouth.
Thank you.